Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to our webinar. Today, we'll be learning about Kotawêw, the Indigenous HIV-STBBI Doula project. My name is Ella, and I'm pleased to be welcoming Melissa Morris and Candace Neumann, our speakers for today. This webinar is taking place on November 5th, 2024, and we are recording the webinar today so that we can share it with people who are not able to attend. This webinar is organized by the Manitoba HIV-STBBI Collective Impact Network. The Collective Impact Network is a network of innovators working collaboratively to transform the landscape of HIV and STBBIs in Manitoba. We bring people together to tackle complex HIV and STBBI systems barriers, and we seek systems change by shifting the conditions that are holding the problems in place. I'm speaking to you today from Treaty 1 in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We acknowledge that we work and gather on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Cree, Cree, Dakota, Lakota, Inuit, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. At the Collective Impact Network, we are humbly working together towards the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls for action and the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry's calls for justice through our research, events, and other projects. If you'd like to find out more about the Collective Impact Network, sign up to receive our newsletter, or find our social media and YouTube page, you can do so at cinetwork.ca. This webinar is part of our ongoing efforts to provide education, and you can find past resources on our YouTube page. We will have a question and answer period after the presentation today, and I ask that you type your questions into the Q&A feature. You can type a question at any time during the presentation. It's my pleasure to welcome our speakers. Melissa Morris is a two-spirit Indigiqueer individual. She proudly holds citizenship with the Manitoba Métis Federation, tracing her ancestral roots to the Red River Settlement, northern Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. She also embraces the identity of a person with lived experience, having resided in Vancouver's downtown east side for more than a decade, where she faced challenges related to addiction and homelessness. Melissa has emerged as a prominent national activist within the HIV and STBBI community, leveraging her strength-based narratives to address the disparities that Indigenous individuals living with sexually transmitted and bloodborne infections encounter. In addition to her position as the manager of the Village Lab, Melissa serves as a community coordinator at the Winniska Center for Indigenous STBBI Research and works through their community partner, Ganniganichik, based in Treaty 1 territory. Simultaneously, she's pursuing her education as a student in the Inner City Social Work program within the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Manitoba, actively working towards her Bachelor of Social Work degree. In her spare time, Melissa generously volunteers her efforts with the Nine Circles Community Health Center, where she serves on the board of directors. We also welcome today Candace Neumann. Candace Neumann is a Red River Métis doula, artist, student, sun dancer, cedar bath conductor, and community helper from Treaty 1 territory, Winnipeg, Manitoba. Her spirit name, Leads with Light, guides her in her community work and is grounded in her relationships with her family and her community. She comes from a long line of fierce aunties and carries on the tradition with her 13 nephews and nieces and one great niece. Alongside Indigenous midwife Melissa Brown, Candace co-founded Zagadewen Indigenous Doula Training. Together, they have trained hundreds of doulas from Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. As a doula, Candace volunteers her time to support Indigenous women and 2 LGBTQIA+ birthing people whenever she can. Candace is a full-time student in the Master of Social Work in Indigenous Knowledges program at the University of Manitoba and a member of the Kotawêw research team through Ganniganichik and the Village Lab at the University of Manitoba. So as you can see from these incredibly lengthy and incredibly amazing bios, these two people are doing amazing work, very busy individuals, bringing a lot of knowledge to us today. So I want to thank you both very much for being here, and I'll let you take it away with your presentation.
Okay, there we go. So thank you so much for that introduction. And I don't know if you want to say anything, Melissa, before we start.
Yeah, I think we're good. We can just jump right in.
Okay.
So, one thing I would like to add that the Kotawêw project is a partnership between Gani Kanichuk and the Village Lab, which are both situated in Treaty 1.
Perfect. And I feel weird. I am weird, but I feel weird because I can't see anybody. So if I seem weird, then yes, that is the reality. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to get started here. Our project is expanding the role of Indigenous doulas in HIV STBBI care in Manitoba, and I'm really happy to be sharing this information with everybody. So thank you for that beautiful land acknowledgement. I like to always start with that land acknowledgement because it really is very grounding. I won't go over this because we had that one, but I do want to acknowledge that our water comes from Shoal Lake 40 in Treaty 3 territory. And I also want to acknowledge that they just got their own water treatment plant in 2021 after being under boil water advisory for over 25 years. I think it's really important, especially today, but always to acknowledge the land. And today I want to also acknowledge part of the grief of this land in our loss of Senator Murray Sinclair, who was just such a leader and pushed the work forward. I truly believe that non-Indigenous folks would not necessarily be caring about reconciliation and the work of Indigenous activist if it wasn't for Murray St. Clair. So I just want to acknowledge him today. And so I also want to take a minute to introduce our team. I'm so happy to be a part of this amazing team. Other than Dr. Rusty Suleimanov, we are all Indigenous. We identify as women, queer, two-spirit folks on our team. So Melissa was introduced, but we also have Anne Favell, Laverne Gervais, Dr. Albert McLeod, Tara Christensen, Skye Wickyard, and myself, alongside Dr. Rusty Suleimanov. And this is just part of our team. So Melissa will talk a little bit about our CGCs. I also want to introduce the meaning of our name. Oh, I'm hearing a little bit of something. I don't know if it's coming from me, but it just, if anyone has a question, feel free to jump in. So the meaning of Kotawêw is derived from the Cree language, and it means making a fire. It represents the sacred act of bringing warmth and light into the world. The doulas who provide culturally safe prevention and care to Indigenous communities ignite a flame of hope and healing, particularly for those living with HIV and STBBIs. Through their guidance and support, they bring light to the path of women, two-spirit, trans, and gender diverse people navigating complex life and health journeys. And so this beautiful name was gifted to us by one of our amazing elders, Painted Sky Woman, or as most people might know her, Leslie Spillett. And so we really let this name guide us in our work, and also the way that we do our work. And so before Melissa talks a little bit about our community guiding circles, I just want to share a concept called Baba Mitzawin. And so when I was in one of my classes, I was very lucky to sit with a beautiful elder, Sherry Copenhace. And I asked her, what is the Anishinaabe word for accountability? How do we explain and describe accountability in our own languages? And so she shared this term, Baba Mitzawin, which kind of translates to "it is my business." And so our accountability in the work that we do is because of Baba Mitzawin. It is my business to know what's going on in my community, and to be able to do something about it, to work within best abilities of my skill set to do something about it. And so that's kind of what guides us in all of our work, but we're also accountable to our community guiding circle. And so I'll let Melissa explain that a little bit.
Hey, there we go. Now I'm unmuted. So, in all of our research that we do with the Village Lab, and a lot of community-based research, we have a community guiding circle. And in the Kotawêw project, we've called together Indigenous women and Two-Spirit LGBTQIA who live with or are impacted by HIV or STBBIs. We have a range of Indigenous women and queer people that are between 25 and 75. And it's such a diverse group. Like the text says, their parents, grandparents, they're community workers, they're teachers, they're artists, they're activists, and they're just so much more. And this community guiding circle has been a little bit different than previous in that we've been able to really incorporate that age range and that just broader experiences into this community guiding circle. So the community guiding circle will validate our data, make sure that we're on the right track. They were the ones to review our research questions, and they were the first ones to, as we like to call the interview process, a visiting instead of the traditional interview process. They were the first ones to visit with us and share their broad range of knowledge. We've come together for a couple meetings, and the last one, and Candace had just shared the meaning of the name Kotawêw, which has to do with fire. And so we sat around with Leslie Spillett and we talked about fire. We built a fire. And we shared what really that home fire, which is really needed for as an integral part of wellness, what that looks like to us. And so in the forthcoming months, we will meet with our community guiding circle. We will ask them for feedback if we're on the right track with our data. And I'm just really excited with this community guiding circle. It's such a wonderful group. And we really have a good time when we get together.
Thanks. And so some of the background of this current research was just kind of looking at that resurgence of Indigenous birth work. And so also understanding and embracing that tradition of helpers known as doulas. So doula is not an Indigenous term, but we use that term because it is kind of commonly recognized. But it really is rooted in that tradition of people supporting each other through pregnancy, labor, and postpartum periods. Doulas offer that continuous, non-medical, emotional, and advocacy support. And so we really wanted to understand and also facilitate that potential for contributions to HIV and STBBI care and prevention for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis women, Two-Spirit, trans, and gender diverse folks. And so we really do strive to bridge this knowledge gap. We are dedicated to uncovering insights that can enhance the support and care provided by doulas within these communities. And so part of our early kind of processes was meeting with a group out of New York, and they're called What Would an Indigenous HIV Doula Do? They really were the inspiration. They were called What Would an HIV Doula Do? But they were really the inspiration for the idea of an Indigenous HIV doula. So what would an HIV doula do is a community of people joined in response to the ongoing AIDS crisis to understand a doula as someone who holds space in times of transition. We understand HIV as a sense of as a series of transitions that begin long before being tested, that continue after treatment and beyond. We know that since no one gets HIV alone, no one should have to live with HIV alone. We doula ourselves, each other, institutions, and culture. Foundational to our process is asking questions. And this is taken directly from their website. So, Melissa, if you want to share a little bit about that meeting that we had.
Yeah, so I think it was maybe 2021. Myself and Laverne Gervais, we met with a couple of these doulas from New York. And we found out that it wasn't just New York, that there was people across the country that were meeting during COVID to talk about the support they're providing. But it wasn't just like service providers. These were academics, these were family members, these were community members that really believed in the process of not letting people non-traditional care. So, and especially when we look at that in an Indigenous concept, it's relationality. So relations, kinship are really the basis of the foundation of wellness. And this is really what this process is about. It's about mutual aid and pushing back against systems that we know don't work for us. One of the things that really stood out for this meeting for me was the concept of academic anarchism. And I actually looked it up relating to HIV, and there's a really good blog by Alexander McClelland, and that talks about, you know, how we can push back against systems and provide mutual caring aid for our community in non-traditional ways. So whether we provide that through culture, which a lot of people really, you know, they need a connection to something, you know. I hear a lot, and I experience this myself as a person living with HIV, that feeling of just being alone. And the connection to other people living with HIV, the connection to a community member that, you know, is there for me, is like fundamental in taking care of people. So I was really excited about this meeting, and I actually learned quite a bit from it.
Thanks. And so this was the first kind of part of our research. This was actually that consent process, that asking permission from the community. And so this report came out in 2024. It's called Resurgence of Our Relatives, and it's centering kinship storytelling in Indigenous HIV doula work. And so it was conducted in the winter of 22-23. And really, it was that process of asking permission from the community if this is something that the community wanted, because we had these ideas about it, but was the community keen for this to happen? And so we interviewed 10 community peers, so helpers, elders, and people who live with HIV. Many of the people who we interviewed as part of this research are part of our team or part of our CGC now. So it really was foundational to the work that we're doing now. And this final report is available on the Village Lab website if you are interested in checking that out. And so, you know, it really was about consent. And when we're talking about research, and I really love that term, academic anarchy. I don't think I've ever heard that before, but of course I learned it from Melissa Morris, who's one of the greatest anarchists of that I know of. But really, when we're talking about research, it really is finding that balance of consent with research, especially in Indigenous communities. And so when we're thinking about consent, it's something that's land-based. We offer that tobacco, we offer those medicines if people want, and that is for that grounding, that balance, and that centering. Consent is relational, you know, it's about introducing ourselves, building relationships, offering tea, snacks, making connections with people, sharing of self and sharing of intentions. And consent is also harm reduction, right? It's about giving all of the information, allowing people to make their own decisions about how their stories will be used and shared, how much they want to participate or how much they don't want to participate. And so it's really important to kind of honor that consent process with all of this as well. So I'll pass it off to you here, Melissa.
So some of the things that we asked in the beginning, like I guess you would call that almost a consultation phase, was that we asked people, do you think people newly diagnosed or living with HIV could benefit from there being HIV doulas? How do you think our community could benefit from having doulas that are specifically familiar with HIV, other STBBIs, and are known as HIV-STBBI doulas? And what would an HIV-STBBI doula look like to you? Who are they? What would they do? Who would they be? How would they connect? And we asked, what are some things that are important to you as a community helper? How could culture, traditions, and spiritual practices be part of this role? And what would you need to do this work? How has an HIV or STBBI diagnosis impacted you or a loved one? And how could this inform the HIV doula role? And finally, if there was a training for this role, what should it include? And what would you like to see in a training?
Awesome, thanks. If you hear my cat in the background, my partner just left, so he's crying for him. I don't have a baby I'm ignoring over there. So some of the findings, I won't go too much into this because that report is there. But we did identify some of the things that were needed for this work, proper compensation, resources, commitment from agencies and clinics to integrate this work within agencies and healthcare spaces, a space that is designated for that doula work, promotion of this work so that the community is aware of it, a team of workers, links to care, alongside all of those cultural supports that people identified. And then we also asked, what kind of trainings would people want to see if we were training people for this role? And these were some of the things that were identified. And so this is really key because this is kind of what the basis for Kotawêw is, because part of the purpose of Kotawêw is to create that curriculum and that training. So this was really an essential finding out of that research. Ultimately, the recommendations that came out was that healthcare providers need to know more about this work, the benefits of HIV doulas, and make referrals for people newly diagnosed or who are being tested to access HIV-STBBI doulas in Manitoba. Service providers need to be aware of a variety of benefits that HIV doulas can bring to their agencies and communities, including advocacy, community work, relationship building, and cultural reconnection. And so you only have to go and look at some of that research that's coming out of doulas supporting Indigenous birth work to see the benefits that doula make in people's lives. Service providers and advocates must include people with lived experiences. This is something that people with lived experiences have been saying from the beginning, including people living with HIV in doula roles, advocate to include people with lived experience in service and programming development and delivery, and center the experiences of people living with HIV and doula work. And so making sure that every step of the way people with lived experiences are involved in all of those processes, especially in the process of creating those roles and those positions. It can't just be a matter of, having a position there and trying to fill it with someone with lived experience. They have to be there to design what that position looks like. And then platform spaces need to be created at community-based organizations and health clinics, healthcare settings for HIV doula work to happen. Both community agencies and clinics need to consider incorporating doula positions within their workplaces. And so these are some of the these are the objectives of the Kotawêw study project. So the first one is to create that knowledge, to generate the new information about HIV, specifically for Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, trans, and gender diverse individuals in Manitoba, to enhance care and prevention. So our objective is to improve HIV STBBI treatment and prevention efforts for Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, trans, and gender diverse people in Manitoba. We plan to achieve this through a community-based, peer-led doula training program. And then finally, to strengthen that capacity. So we want to center Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, trans, and gender diverse individuals living with HIV. Our focus is on strengthening capacity to actively participate in and lead community-based research related to HIV, as well as engage in Indigenous-led interventions. And so, that's a mouthful, but basically we want to build up the knowledge. We want to use the information that we are gathering to create our training package for our future Indigenous HIV doulas, who ultimately will be people with lived experience. So the ways that we're going about our research, the so-called methodologies, these are based in our Indigenous ways of doing, knowing, and being. And so we're really focusing on concepts of and processes of kinship, storytelling, and land. They're more than just concepts. They really are, ways of life and ways of connecting for us. They're all interconnected, interrelated, and I'll explain that a little bit more. So our research team are engaging in a series of visits with community members from 4 groups. So we're sitting with relatives who live with HIV, STBBIs. We're sitting with relatives who have a loved one who lives with HIV and STBBIs. We're sitting with those community helpers, service providers, and healthcare workers who support Indigenous women and Two-Spirit, 2S LGBTQIA plus folks who live with HIV and STBBIs, and also visiting with community elders, knowledge keepers who support Indigenous women and 2S LGBTQIA plus who live with HIV and STBBIs. So all of these visits are semi-structured. They all start with an offering of tobacco to those community members. They start with the smudge if the person wants a smudge. We offer those teas, those snacks, get people comfortable before we engage in the actual structural part of those visits. And so just kind of understanding some of those terms that I shared before. So kinship is really about relationships. And so I can't remember, I don't have the exact quote, but I remember seeing it when I was doing my readings and somebody had said, HIV is a kinship disease. Hey, we don't get HIV on our own, and we need to take care of it together. So kinship is essential. I'll share a little bit more about kinship, but I just want to read through some of these quotes. So this first one comes from Tanya Talaga, and she says, attachments, kinship, and family tell us who we are, where we come from. They give us a sense of dignity, a sense of belonging right from birth. In Indigenous cultures, family units go beyond the traditional nuclear family living together in one house. Families are extensive networks of strong connections. They're often entire communities. And then this other quote from Kovac says, from an Indigenous point of view, relational means self in relationship with the natural world, the human world, kin, community, place, and land, relationships over time, relationships that are interdependent and collectivist. And so this really is what that accountability comes back to, why our whole team is involved in this work. We are all not just doing this research, but we are all doing community work because of these strong kinship ties. So I always think of, hearing Leslie Spillett speak years ago, it was like 2013, and she was sharing about her work in community, working with a lot of Indigenous women who are kind of often pushed out to the margins of society. And due to colonization, oppression, people will often come and say, well, I didn't grow up in my culture. I don't know my culture. I didn't grow up. And there's often that sense of insecurity, hey, because people feel like maybe they're not worthy of it because they don't know, they didn't grow up in that way. But she reminded us in that moment, she said, first and foremost, our culture is our kinship. And we all belong there. And so that just really always stuck with me when I think about what that meaning of kinship is. And then also, when we're engaging in these interviews, it's not just about the people that we're visiting with, that we're talking with, it's about ourselves and our own place in that process as well, that interconnection and our place in community. The next term that I want to just kind of share a little bit more about is storytelling. And so with these visits, we really are trying to engage actively with stories of folks and honor them in the best way possible. And so I really, really love this quote. So they say storytelling is ancient and potent. I can't see all of the quote here, so I can't read this word here. It is our most instinctive and human form of communication, of teaching, of persuasion, of validation, of healing, of transformation. And so storytelling, when we think about research and how we gather like so-called data, that's what research is about, is getting data. To us, that's stories. And it is really important. And we really take it very seriously in honoring people's stories. And so yesterday in our meeting, we're starting in the process of kind of analyzing and looking for themes. And one of our team members brought up the fact that it really is uncomfortable to feel like we're picking apart people's stories. Because these stories have made us laugh, they've made us cry, they've brought us together, they've connected us heart to heart. We've created kinship over these stories. And so that is a challenge. But we also recognize that as Indigenous people, when we're gathering for our community, whether it's medicines, whether it's foods, berries, animals, plants, we're always processing these things, and we process them in ways that make them, that we can share them with our community. And so that's what that process, that's how we honor these stories in that research process as well. And then the next piece is land, and how land comes into play. And so, when we're thinking about land, it's such a vast concept. And this is something that personally in my own life that I'm thinking about all the time, because it really is connected to everything. All of our systems in place, all of our systems that exist currently have to do with land here in what is currently known as Canada. And so we honor the land in different ways through our research. We offer that tobacco, we offer medicines through smudging, through tea. We do some of those land-based things. Eagle fanning, we carry out our ceremonies, those pipe ceremonies, cedar bath ceremonies, those fire ceremonies. We acknowledge our connection to community places where we live, where we connect, where we ceremony, and then our language and our creation stories. And so I really love this image from Erin Consmo, because they really acknowledge like a lot of our research and where we're kind of visiting with folks is here in Winnipeg, in Treaty 1 territory, and it's an urban place. And so people, when they think of the land, they're thinking of like Birds Hill, they're thinking of the north, the bush, but this is such a sacred place as well. And the land is more than just the place we live, hey. The land is where we were born. This is where we buried our ancestors buried placentas, where we ate the plants of the earth, where we ate the animals that ate the plants, when we did all of our stages of of life ceremonies. And when we passed away, our bodies went back into the earth and we fed those plants that fed the animals that fed us. And that process continued for thousands and thousands of years. So whether we acknowledge it or not, we are the land and the land is us. And so it plays very much a huge part in the work that we're doing for our communities and in our communities as well. And so where we're at with our research, so we're actually kind of finishing up those visits. So we've sat with 20 out of 20 peers that we had intended, 7 out of 7 of the relatives of people with lived experience. We've sat with most of our service providers, and we're starting our process with our elder knowledge keepers, who are those like slippery little people out there. They're hard to tack down. Yeah, and then we've also started presenting on some of this work, and then some presentations that are coming up. I don't know, Melissa, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, so you can see that our recruitment poster is there. So, and Candace had previously mentioned that our criteria for this, or like what would qualify people to be interviewed, would be that they were impacted or they lived with HIV or other STBBIs, and they identified as First Nations, Métis, or Inuit. They lived in Manitoba and they were 18 or over.
And so, as I mentioned, we are in the process of just kind of processing or analyzing the stories that we've heard. And so far, this is some of the knowledge that has come out of this this work and this story sharing. You know, people sharing about those health system failures, that disconnection between knowledge and healthcare providers, the lack of doctors, nurses, and social workers who are really knowledgeable and supportive of work in HIV and STBBI care, that systemic racism that is just hanging over us always, especially as Indigenous people. One of the things that I was really thinking about in kind of identifying these things is, you know, Indigenous people are often labeled as lost to care. And I really have issue with that term, because we have been in care. We have really been harmed by care. And so it's not a matter that we're lost to care. It's a matter that there's sometimes choice to not access care the way that it is. That's why it's really important to start to think outside the box, the systemic box of the ways that we can support our community members so that everyone has access and has the privilege of living those beautiful, healthy lives that we all deserve to have. There's a lot of that racialized, sexualized drug use discrimination, you know, all those interlocking systems of oppression, the need for cultural spaces embedded in systems of care. That doula is a collective role, right? We need outreach teams, we need advocates, one-on-one peer support, parenting support, cultural connection, all of that collection of supports and care for our relatives. A lot of medical gaslighting, that lateral violence, and then grief, and the different ways that we heal or process or don't process grief, and the things that we can start to do about that. And then more education and access to information and resources for all of our relatives. And then a huge one, as always, is that stigma and that blame that's put on our relatives that live with HIV and STBBIs. But also out of that, you know, it's not just kind of that heavier stuff that we are already familiar with. But we also recognize that when we ask people what they like about living in Winnipeg, almost every single person said that the community the people, their relatives, their relations, their friends. Almost every single person identified this as what they like about being here in Winnipeg. For many people, hearing stories from someone with lived experience, meeting someone with lived experience and hearing their story for the first time was very transformational and healing. And then most of our relatives have identified at least one community agency that they're connected to here in Treaty 1 territory. And I think this is really essential because sometimes it feels so overwhelming to do the work and to get the work done. But I think this really speaks to all of those beautiful gifts that we have here in our community. Again, it's taking it back to those relationships, kinships, those stories that we hear, and those connections to the place that we're at. Because when you think about this, the service and community agencies here in Winnipeg, they are like no other in what is currently known as Canada. They are very unique to the prairies and to the work that we do here in Winnipeg. Did you want to add anything here, Melissa?
No, I think really, it's a lot of what we hear is very negative about, our Indigenous communities. We're constantly being marginalized and placed into smaller boxes. First, you're Indigenous women, next, you're a person that uses drugs. And so really, what's coming out of these stories is that people need relationships, right? And it needs to happen regardless of what the system dictates, right? And the system really dictates that people need to access traditional health care. When we're seeing that quote unquote loss to care, and Indigenous people know how to take care of their own people. And I think when it really comes to HIV and STBBIs, the traditional approach to caring for communities and forcing them into into systems that just aren't geared for them. They were never made for them. This is a whole new outlook of looking at caring for our community by relations, which will in turn, enable them to access care in a that non-clinical sense, right? And I'm super excited about this project. As a person that's lived with HIV for 17 years, I can't tell you how many times something like this would have helped me along my journey.
Thank you. And so the research results, all the outcomes of the research will be shared in a narrative report. We, as always, as we do at Ganikanichik, a ceremony and a feast will be held to share this report with participants and community agency partners, anyone who supported this initiative and are invested in the research and the community work that will come out of it. And the research will be used to create a curriculum to train and further the work of Indigenous HIV-STBBI doulas and help close those service gaps for Indigenous women and 2S LGBTQIA+ folks who live with or are at risk of HIV and STBBIs. And I feel like it's also just the beginning because Melissa's starting her academic journey. So I feel like there's going to be grand things coming in the future. And so I just want to say, miigwech, marci, masicho, hi, thank you to all of our community partners, our funding partners, and also for the beautiful artwork that was given by permission from Wabi Miguel to use for the presentation. And then also if there's any questions on this work. So I'm going to stop share.
Thank you so much, Melissa and Candace, again. For everyone in attendance, you will see that I put a survey link in the chat. If you have a moment to complete our survey, It helps us continue to improve our education series and receive continued funding for work like this. And as I mentioned, the Q&A feature is open, and we welcome your questions in the Q&A feature.
I'm a really shy, introverted person, so I just feel like so weird.
Oh, we have someone with a raised hand.
Okay. Oh, you might have to unmute them, hey?
Hello?
Hi.
My chat said it was disabled.
Yes, it's the Q&A feature, not the chat. But feel free to ask your question verbally as well.
That was my question, I think.
Okay.
Because it says, okay, now I don't see the survey
Oh no.
in the chat.
You know
Okay, no,
what?
wait.
I think
Okay,
there
wait,
was
now
like,
I see the survey in the chat, but it says chat disabled.
Yeah, so the Q&A feature will be along the bottom of your screen, and it has two bubbles, and then it says Q&A. For
Pardon?
anyone else also having any problems finding the Q&A feature, it'll be beside the chat button with two bubbles. Two chat bubbles.
Yeah, I'm on my cell phone, so this is the first time I used my cell before.
That's
My
all right.
laptop, my laptop caught some viruses, so.
That's all right. Did you have a question that you wanted to ask verbally to the presenters?
No, I was just asking about the survey. How come I couldn't click it?
We'll also send it out to everyone who participated today via email. So another option will be to get that link via email within the next hour if you're
Okay,
having any
great.
trouble with the chat. And if anyone
Okay.
else is having trouble with the Q&A feature, feel free to raise your hand and you can ask your question verbally. Otherwise, we have about 10 minutes for any other questions in the Q&A feature.
I see a question here. And so it asks, I am wondering, are the participants hesitant or eager to participate? Is this working as an opportunity to support community members take more autonomy in their care? So for the most part, it is voluntary. People reach out and they get me when they reached out. And so I explain, I go through like those screening questions to make sure that they are in fact eligible and within, you know, kind of that demographic, and they are volunteering to participate. So I explain what the process looks like and how long it takes. So it really does come down to building, trying to make that space as safe and build kinship and that relationship as quickly as possible in that time. And so most of the interviews were held at Ganikanichik in their medicine room. And so, you know, most people, they know what they're coming there for, and so they are willing to share. But people also had the ability and have the ability to not answer questions that they didn't feel comfortable asking. And they also have the ability to anything that they shared, remove or add onto that as well. And so one of the things that happens when we sign on for something, and then all of a sudden we're talking about it, is we can hesitate within ourselves to, what can I share? How much do I want to share? And that's within people's rights. And it's not about pushing people to go beyond what their comfort is. We've had a couple people that didn't want for their their chats to be recorded, and that's okay as well. So really, we try to make that space as comfortable and safe for people as possible. Did you want to add anything else, Melissa?
I think, you know, people were hesitant once and I wouldn't say a lot, I would say maybe one or two. But you know, once that recorder went off, right, there was relationship, and there was kinship, right? And so it was really about, you know, that mistrust in the, you know, with research. And I think that can be mitigated by kinship. But again, you know, like, not everybody wants to share on a recorder, and that's great. It's their autonomy to decide what they're comfortable sharing with, how they want to share it with us. And if we can share that in a broader way, it's their choice. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like I feel like a lot of people came and they were pretty comfortable, but because we are a research project through the university, and we have to honor like that ethics process, which isn't based in our ways and our practices, and that consent form is like the bane of my existence. Not that I don't want people to have the opportunity for consent and to get all of their information, but I feel like we need to find a better way, because it is just so it's like I don't know, it's just like a fear-based thing that I think is not within the realm of creating a safe space for people when you talk about all of the things that could possibly go wrong, or all of these, like, where to go if they have issues with the person who's talking to them, and things like that. So I feel like the consent process took a little bit to get people to come back. For some people, some people were just like, they knew they were fine, whatever. But there was a couple people I can think of that going through that document. Yeah. But for that, there was also quite a few people in the interviews who were so happy and excited to be able to share their stories, knowing that this is going to be something that helps somebody, like they were back when they were first diagnosed, or first experiencing some of those challenges as somebody living with HIV. So yeah, I think for the
I think
most
this just sheds light to, you know, some of the colonial practices need to change, right? The way we do consent forms is a little bit, you know, it can scare people, right? You know, you're signing a form, right? Yeah, it's a little bit invasive. Whereas, you know, Indigenous ways are done through oral. They were, you know, historically, oral traditions prevailed. I just think that, you know, and for the most part, yes, people are really excited to share and to contribute to this project. Um and yeah, I think for the one or two people that were questioning it, it's valid questions, and it's, you know, a point in, you know, maybe pointing to how can we do practices like consent in comfortable ways with our community.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much for answering that question and providing all that extra context. I think it sort of like a microcosm of the bigger presentation that you just discussed, and yeah, really reflects just one small example of a greater whole. We have a couple more minutes for questions. If there's any other questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A. We'll just give folks one more minute. Sorry, go ahead, Candace.
I was just also going to say, like, with that ethics, because I did most of the ethics proposal, and if anyone's ever done an university ethics proposal for research, there was one line that we had to sign off on our sign-off page that said, all the university has the final say on how data will be used. And that did not sit well with me. And so we had to think of a way to kind of counter that in a way where our proposal would get passed. And so as part of our ethics application, we had put we acknowledged that statement, but right below it we put our community kukums and grandmothers have final say in how this data will be used. And they didn't challenge that. So so this is kind of like what we're dealing with, and that balance of doing this kind of research, Western research in our communities, in the kind of work that we love to do, that I know Melissa loves to do, that I love to do, that community-based work that's grounded in our relationships, and all of those things that we talked about. So that's part of the challenge and balance that Indigenous folks engaging in research have to navigate. So yeah.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank you both again for your time and for sharing, answering questions, and being available today. As I mentioned, for everyone that is joining us today, I'll be sending out the link to the survey and a follow-up, and this resource will be posted on our YouTube page for anyone that wants to view it. And I'll also include information in case anyone wants to get in touch with Melissa or Candace about the project or has further questions. Oh, we have one more question. Do we have a minute for one more question?
Yep.
So this person is wondering how they can incorporate these teachings into the HIV workshops that are not taking place in Winnipeg.
So yeah, I think where we're at, what our ultimate goal is that this will be shared, and the doula training will be shared outside of Winnipeg. And so once we have that ready, we can definitely share. And I love Manitoba Harm Reduction Network, so they'll definitely be a part of once we have that training ready to train Indigenous HIV STBBI doulas. It will be, our goal is that it's going to be made to that broader population as well, and not just Winnipeg. That report as well that will come out of this will be able to be shared. And so we are also creating a newsletter that's going to be coming out just to keep people aware of what's happening with the research, because we're really still pretty early in it. Hey, although Melissa and I and some of the other folks, we've started thinking about what that curriculum's going to look like, what that training's going to look like, because we're ready to go and ready to do the work. We're still pretty early in the research, but as soon as it's done, it will be shared. It's not just for Winnipeg, it's going to be shared so that this can reach as many people as possible. Did you have anything you want to add, Melissa?
No, I think that's great. Thanks, Candace.
Yeah. So once the newsletter's out, we'll definitely be sharing that with 9 Circles, and then you can share that with all of anyone interested.
That's great. Thank you so much. And thanks again for your presentation and for everyone who's attended today. And we'll be in touch, and we look forward to your updates and your work on your wonderful project.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.